Arab leaders approve Egypt's plan for Gaza's future, including major reconstruction and elections. It follows President Trump's proposal to forcibly expel Palestinians and turn Gaza into a US-controlled beach resort. So can the Arab nations' plan become reality? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. At a summit in Cairo, Arab leaders set out their vision for Gaza's future, weeks after US President Donald Trump presented his own. His idea to forcibly expel Palestinians and turn Gaza into a US-controlled beach resort has been widely condemned. At the summit, Arab nations approved Egypt's plan, which includes major investment in reconstruction and housing. There's political rebuilding too, with Palestinian technocrats taking control before elections. Well, Israel swiftly rejected the Arab proposal, saying President Trump's plan is the way forward. And within hours, US officials reconfirmed Trump's vision as US policy. So what does all of this mean for Palestinians starved of supplies by Israel's blockade, their homes and cities reduced to rubble by Israel's war? Can the Arab leaders' plan become reality? And if not, what next? We'll speak to our guest shortly, but first, this report from Wilson Dazide.
On Tuesday, Arab League leaders met in Cairo to discuss what Gaza's future could look like and endorsed a $53 billion plan to rebuild the Strip.
Egypt also worked in cooperation with our brothers in Palestine to form an administrative committee of independent Palestinian professionals and technocrats entrusted with managing the Gaza Strip based on the expertise of its members.
The summit follows U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to forcibly remove Palestinians from Gaza and turn the Strip into what he called a Riviera of the Middle East. After global condemnation, apart from in the U.S. and Israel, he later said it was just a proposal. The Arab world has been vocal and united in its opposition.
We welcome the Egyptian-Palestinian Arab plan to rebuild the Gaza Strip with the Palestinians in their homeland without displacement, and we call on US President Donald Trump to support reconstruction efforts on this basis and not on any other basis.
The Palestinian Authority represented Palestinians at the summit. Hamas was not present. It's still calling on Israel to fulfill its commitments under the Gaza ceasefire agreement. Instead, Israel has reinstated its total blockade on the Strip, halting the entry of not only humanitarian aid, but also food, fuel, and medicine. It leaves 2.3 million Palestinians trying to survive in brutal conditions in makeshift shelters in an area destroyed by Israeli bombardment carried out with U.S. and European weapons.
We stress our rejection of the Israeli decision to prevent entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, which violates international law. Jordan will continue to make every effort to support the steadfastness of our Palestinian brothers, provide aid to Gaza, and care for the Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem.
As President Trump was delivering the longest presidential address in modern history to a joint session of Congress, he uttered the word Gaza only once. Any political solution to Israel's war will require the U.S.'s backing and U.S. political interest. Palestinians, meanwhile, live with the consequences of Washington's policies and its decision to give Israel the freedom to do as it likes with Gaza. Wilson Dizard, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's take a look at what Arab leaders envisage over the next 5 years. The plan involves an initial 6-month period for clearing rubble and removing unexploded ordnance. That's expected to cost $3 billion. For the next 2 years, more housing would be repaired and installed and infrastructure replaced. Estimated cost of that, $20 billion. And the following 2 years would see the completion of at least 400,000 permanent homes, along with an airport and seaport. It's the most expensive phase at roughly $30 billion. The implementation of the plan depends on the establishment of an interim administration overseen by the Palestinian Authority. PA President Mahmoud Abbas has said elections are possible next year, but the plan doesn't specifically call for them. Egypt and Jordan have said they're willing to train Palestinian security forces. Arab leaders also reiterated calls for UN peacekeepers to be stationed in the Strip during the rebuilding. Well, let's bring in our guests from Tel Aviv. We're joined by Ori Goldberg, a political commentator and former academic specializing in Middle East studies. In Doha, Mansour Shuman, a Middle East political analyst and citizen journalist from Gaza. During Israel's war, he took refuge at the Nasser hospital for months. And in San Francisco, Stephen Zunez, a professor of politics and founding chairman of the Middle Eastern Studies program at the University of San Francisco. A warm welcome to you all. If I could start with Mansour in Doha. Mansour, does this Arab proposal offer a solid plan for Gaza's future?
I believe that Palestinians are optimistic about the outcomes of this last Arab summit. The fact that the Arab leaders from all over geographies have come together and aligned on things that are very important for Palestine and its future, in alignment with what the Palestinian people inside Gaza want is good news. So no forced displacement, right? There's a rebuild plan by money by the Arab leaders themselves. There's no need for aid from outside. We're talking about elections between the Palestinians in order to bring forth whoever will lead the Palestinians into the upcoming future. We are talking about immediate aid that will help the Palestinians on the ground right now. We're talking about empowering the Palestinian population in Gaza to take forward the next steps when it comes to Gaza and ensuring that the rebuild is completed.
Mansour, if I could jump in, Israel is condemning it. It's outdated, the Israelis say, and it doesn't condemn the October 7th attack.
The Israelis can condemn it. I mean, it's their right to do so. But I think that they would be very unhappy with the fact that for the first time in many years, all the Arab leaders have come forth and agreed on a future that the Palestinians also want for themselves, right? So it doesn't matter who the weapons are with in Palestine. As long as the root cause of the matter, which is the occupation, remains, people will always want to seek freedom. And at the end, they all want a political solution. They want to ensure that they live free from occupation and they have a free Palestine with Jerusalem as their capital.
Okay, let's bring in Ori. As I mentioned, Ori, Israel has rejected the plan. Does that ultimately mean this plan is derailed, or maybe not derailed, that it's a non-starter before it gets on track?
Oh, I would say it's quite the opposite. I think Israel has very little influence on the course of events at the moment. And while White House officials may have said that the president stands by his vision, I read Donald Trump's remarks as an admission that the Arab plan is the only show in town. It's the only serious plan that outlines, both a timeline and funding and numbers. The president's Riviera vision has nothing of the sort and will have nothing of the sort. So Israel can condemn to its heart's content, but these condemnations are in many ways effectively meaningless unless Israel offers a rival plan, which Israel has not yet done. Israel is talking about its warfighting plans and it's talking about the Trump plan. Neither of those plans are actual plans, in stark opposition to the Arab plan, which is also the result, as Mansour just said, of a consensus. So I think Israel doth protest too much.
Let's bring Stephen into this then. Ori's more optimistic, shall we say, of how the Trump administration has reacted to this. But when I read the National Security Council spokesperson, Brian Hughes, saying, quote, the current proposal doesn't address the reality that Gaza is currently uninhabitable, how should we read that other than as a rejection?
I would tend to see it as a rejection, in fact, because especially since the administration seems to have doubled down on its insistence that it does want to go forward with the ethnic cleansing and the U.S. takeover. Yes, they could have condemned it more roundly, perhaps. Maybe they are recognizing that just in terms of the international reaction to such a wholesale ethnic cleansing of the population, yet another huge war crime, they couldn't quite get away with it. And maybe they perhaps mince their words somewhat because they are taken aback, I think, by this incredible show of unity by the often divided Arab League. So even though it may not have been categorical as a rejection as one might have expected, I certainly don't see it as much of an openness, especially since the Trump administration tends to take the position, as we've seen in the breakdown of the ceasefire, that Israel can pretty much do what it wants. That even more so than the Biden administration, they're not going to pressure the Israeli government to do anything that it doesn't want to. And so I unfortunately, while I think it's a very solid proposal in most respects, that I don't see things as any realistic prospect of it coming to fruition, at least in the short to medium term.
All right, since we've got a bit of variety of opinion. Yes, Ori, I was going to say, come back in.
If I may jump in and say something about telling Israel it can do what it wants. That certainly seems like granting Israel permission to go back to bombing or to fighting in Gaza. But I think that telling Netanyahu to do what he wants is calling Netanyahu's bluff, because Netanyahu doesn't know what he wants. Netanyahu has two options, neither of which are particularly appealing to him. And Netanyahu does not like to make decisions. Netanyahu likes to present himself as the person who's doing the inevitable. And by telling Netanyahu to do what he wants, by forcing his hand to make a decision, that is applying pressure to Netanyahu, not giving Netanyahu leeway. And in
Ori,
this case,
do you think he will pressure? We did see the Trump administration pressure both sides to agree to a ceasefire. Do you think that we will see that level of intervention from the U.S. administration to pressure the Israeli side in particular into accepting this Arab plan?
I think we will, but I don't think we will see it directly. I think we'll see two parallel axes of progress. I think we'll see the Trump administration giving all sorts of statements about how the plan is unworkable and so on and so forth. But I also think we will see direct pressure applied by President Trump's emissary, Stephen Witkoff. And I think Witkoff and Trump want to make a deal. I think the only party that's capable of making a deal with the Trump administration is the Arab League at the moment. I don't think that this will go smoothly. I think that all the involved parties have a vested interest in making this very difficult, but I don't see any other path.
All right, I want to give I know we need to get Mansour in, but I want to give Stephen another chance to come back in. From where, Stephen, do you get the reading of the pulse of the Trump administration as they're not going to, or this plan is not going to become a reality? Is it because you see the Trump administration is just distracted and busy with other things like Ukraine right now?
Well, that's part of it, certainly, but I really do think that the Trump administration's leadership dealing with Israel and Palestine is from the hard right. It includes these far-right Christian fundamentalists who see God's hand behind Israeli expansionism. And these are people who know that in fact the Democratic Party is not going to be pressuring them as much as they might on other issues. I mean, for example, even with Netanyahu's announced plans to support this wholesale ethnic cleansing, hardly any Democrats have said, "Oh, we're going to withhold military aid to Israel if they do such a thing." I mean, it's really, I really don't think that despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of Americans oppose the idea of ethnic cleansing, even though the majority of Americans are very much opposed to the blank check the United States has been giving to the Israeli government. The fact is that here in the United States we're struggling just to preserve our democracy, much less try to challenge Trump's foreign policy and especially in areas where again we don't have an opposition party being as outspoken as they have been on some other issues.
All right, let's bring Mansour in. Mansour, if this plan has any chance of being implemented, are some points a little vague, like where the $53 billion is going to come from, when elections will happen, who is going to honestly build at this point airports and seaports in Gaza without some kind of guarantees that it won't be destroyed again? Not to mention addressing Israel's demands for the disarmament of Gaza.
I think we need to take this one step at a time. I think that outlining the goal, having a mission and agreed upon vision is excellent starting point. For the time being, yes, there are some issues that need to be taken care of. Like, for example, in Israel, you have one man who's just trying to save his political career, not try to go to courts, and hence he wants to try to bring the region back into instability and war by what Netanyahu is doing in Syria, what he's trying to do in Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank. So hopefully the US administration can see that what they're trying to achieve in terms of political stability and regional growth and development on the economic side will not happen by just allowing Netanyahu to do whatever he wants to save his career, right? So I think that slowly the US government, the administration will like your guests say, come to a deal with the Arab League and with the Palestinian people. And I think that in the end, what's right will happen. Look at Germany and Japan, right? After World War II, they were totally obliterated from the grounds up when it comes to infrastructure, but they were able to rebuild themselves from within their countries and become world superpowers on the commercial side, right? So I think that we need to empower, enable the Palestinians in Gaza with the aid of the Arab leaders around us in order
they didn't suffer, what international and Israeli human rights groups call apartheid. They didn't continue to live under what the ICJ calls an illegal occupation. A little bit of a different scenario there between the post-war reconstruction scenarios you talk about and Gaza.
Yeah, so I think this is where the Americans need to step in and make sure that the second phase and the third phase of the agreed upon ceasefire that was signed a month and a half ago takes place, right? They need to ensure that Netanyahu and his government abide to what they signed up on. And I think that the cards are in the Americans' hand. And one more thing, I think the Arab League right now, their only card right now is to talk about peace, right? What will the peaceful outcome be? But the Arab leaders, the Arab nations, the Arab people in their tens of millions, hundreds of millions, like right now you've only brought up peace as an option. What if these Arab nations, these Arab people were forced to go into war? That's another card that hasn't been played yet. So right now, the Arab League is going towards peace and looking at peace as the only solution. But that might change if Netanyahu does something stupid.
Ori, Israel's reaction to this plan included not only a condemnation of the plan, not only criticism of Arab countries that it said had been using basically the Palestinian cause, but a condemnation and criticism of the Palestinian Authority. Didn't like the idea, obviously, of the PA overseeing a new technocrat administration in Gaza, condemnation of UNRWA for delivering aid. And it begs the question, I know you asked it earlier, what is Israel's alternative plan? Is it simply to resume the war and hope that the war eventually pushes Palestinians out of Gaza one way or another?
No, I would say that is emphatically not Israel's plan, despite the brash rhetoric and despite Israel adopting the pose of the Grinch. Israel is not capable of fighting this war now. Again, everything you hear coming out of the Israeli government, plans for calling up 400,000 reservists, grandiose endeavors in Syria and Lebanon, an occupation of Gaza, settlements of Gaza, none of this corresponds with the situation on the ground in Israel. The Israeli economy is faltering, if not flailing. National resilience is at an all-time low. The failure to return the hostages, to resume the deal, a lot of Israelis would, I think, support following through on the deal and then considering renewing the war, but that's not even an option for Netanyahu's government at the moment. Israel is not equipped at any level to fight this war again. which is why I think that there is an inverse relationship between the intensity of Israel's condemnations and general sourness on the whole thing, and Israel's ruling out pretty much every viable option, and Israel's ability to promote another plan. I have to say this, and I've said this repeatedly, Israel has failed abjectly in achieving any of its self-defined goals for this war. There's no reason to assume that Israel has found a magic formula for success. Israel in this Gaza war has gone from failure to failure. The destruction of Gaza is not a win for
Or if
Israel.
I could jump in, you know, the Israeli government line, they would say that they've weakened Iran, they've weakened some of the groups which Iran supports. How do you read that?
I would read that again as very, very much wishful thinking. Iran certainly took a blow. Hezbollah in Lebanon took a blow, but it seems like events are progressing on the ground in ways that have very little to do with what Israel chooses to do. And I would also point out that Israel seems to have a very limited arsenal. Yes, true. Israel can bomb any target it wants with 2,000-pound bombs delivered free from the United States. That's all. Israel has no midterm plan. It has certainly no long-term plan. And perhaps worst of all, Israel itself doesn't know what it wants. That's why I said when Trump tells Netanyahu, do what you want, he's calling his bluff.
Okay. Stephen, you are not, shall we say, too optimistic about this Arab proposal being put into practice and adopted by the Trump administration. What will then become of Gaza? Do you agree with Ori that a reigniting of the war is unlikely? And then
I'm not sure. It could, in terms of the war, it could go either way. I also think it's very unlikely that they will go through with Trump's plan of ethnic cleansing either. But I think what a more likely scenario is essentially the status quo. That is, the Palestinians are going to continue to suffer. They're not going to be able to rebuild. Aid will at best trickle in, keeping them on a very marginal existence. There may be periodic Israeli airstrikes against certain selected targets. They'll keep troops in certain positions. And basically, it's going to be what we've seen in Gaza in effect, for 20 years now, and that is people just kind of hanging on, only worse so, in the sense that people essentially just struggling under a blockade and terrible conditions, and nothing real dramatic like ethnic cleansing nor a rebuilding along the lines of the Arab League. So that's I know that's a very depressing scenario, but I think frankly that is the most realistic one at this point.
it is a bit depressing. At the risk of making it even more depressing, I want to ask Mansour, because you were actually in Gaza at the time of the war. What would an extension of the status quo, as Stephen put it, what would it mean for everyday life in Gaza?
So right now the humanitarian situation in Gaza is getting worse because Israel has decided to stop all aid coming into the Strip. Again, this goes against the ceasefire agreement in any of its phases, and they are committing a war crime that will be remembered in history. Palestinians have been going through 16 months of genocide attempts, forced displacement attempts, several worsening medical conditions, a lack of clean water. Almost 75 to 80% of the homes are not livable anymore. Their places of worship have been bombed to the ground. Humanitarianly, things look very difficult. However, if the ceasefire agreement with its three phases will be put out and will be actioned upon, I think we can provide some kind of relief to the Palestinians on the ground in Gaza to ensure that they have some sort of dignity while they try to go through this over the next few years. However, like I said, I am very optimistic with the outcomes of the Arab Summit League. I think that the goals that were outlined, and I think that the money that has been put, and the elections, and the roadmap, and the unity of the Arab towards resolving what's happening in Gaza is very optimistic. And look, if I was a Palestinian leader right now, and someone talks to me about, for example, the importance of what needs to happen, we need to be united. We need to ensure that we are working towards a free Palestine. And it's very important to learn from what happened in Ukraine a few decades back, when the US and Russia agreed together with Ukraine to remove the weapons from Ukraine. However, look at Ukraine right now. Ukraine right now is begging to ensure that it remains strong and independent after Russia committing against it a war and trying to take away its land. So I think that Palestinians are going to learn that lesson, and they are not going to make any deal which will include removing their only source of negotiation, which is ensuring that they are able to resist towards a free Palestine.
While we've been focusing obviously on the... go ahead, Ori.
No, if I may just add to Mansour's analysis, with which I concur, the great fragility of Israeli domestic politics at the moment. What Stephen said about the status quo certainly is not just a practical, sober analysis, but it is quite likely to be true. Still, Israel is not in a position that safeguards any status quo. Israeli domestic politics is teetering on the brink, not just because of the dislike or mistrust for Netanyahu, but because of Netanyahu's government's complete failure in governing the country throughout this period of war. I think that should be taken into consideration. Turmoil is just as likely as the preservation of the status quo.
Okay, that's an interesting point. We've got about a minute left, so I want to give it to Stephen. Are we maybe on the verge of even further destabilizing developments? It's expected that the Trump administration, Trump has actually said it, he's going to make, I think 4 weeks ago exactly, he said he's going to make an announcement concerning the West Bank. Is US recognition of Israeli annexation of the West Bank coming, and what would that mean?
Well, at minimum, there will be a recognition of effective Israeli annexation of the illegal settlements and surrounding areas that would consolidate the apartheid situation there. And it could, in fact, go all the way to support annexation of the entire West Bank, though I'm a little more dubious of that, given that the Israeli government itself has not gotten to this point. But I certainly don't see any kind of plan forthcoming that would mean any kind of viable Palestinian state alongside Israel. Indeed, in certain ways, the most unrealistic part of the Arab League proposal is that of a viable two-state solution based on the 1967 borders with a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. Because even many observers, supporters of the Palestinian cause recognize that it may be too late for that. We need to start talking about a binational or democratic secular state, a single state, and that the two-state solution is frankly dead because of the massive colonization of the West Bank. So even short of outright recognition of total annexation, I can't imagine any proposal by the Trump administration coming forward that will do anything but put us further away from a viable two-state solution.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Let's thank our guests very much, Ori Goldberg, Mansour Shuman, and Stephen Zunes. And you can watch too anytime by going over to our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Head over to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here. For now, it's goodbye.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.